Hello and welcome to Public Affairs Public Access on Houston Media Source TV. I'm Linda Cohn with the League of Women Voters. Many of you know the League of Women Voters by our impartial election services. We register voters, we host candidate forums, and we also like to take a look at the important issues of our time. This evening, we're going to talk about one heck of an issue. August 25th, 2017, a tropical event known as Harvey visits our beloved hometown of Houston. Even now, a year later, the raw numbers are staggering. More than 50 inches of rain and nearly 30% of Harris County underwater. The response to this calamity continues to move through the traditional stages of relief, recovery, and reform. Speaking to that last point, Harris County's Commissioners Court has set in motion a plan for an August 25th date for a special bond election. The voters will be asked to adopt or reject a proposed bond issue that will generate funds to pay for improvements so that we face the future better able to cope with dangerous weather. Please call us with your questions or comments. We'll take as many of those questions as possible. The number 713-807-1794. Again, that number is 713-807-1794. With us this evening is my colleague from the League of Women Voters, Philip Yates. Philip, you are presently serving as vice president of our organization, charged with helping us to explore important topics like this. Tell us a little bit about your background before we get started.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this telecast. My background, I serve in private practice. I mainly do corporate, bankruptcy law, entrepreneurship law, and also I do some civil litigation. Outside of practice of law, I do a lot of advocacy work, a lot with the Houston Area Urban League, and of course the League of Women Voters, which is my passion in terms of civic engagement and really community advocacy. In my capacity with the League of Women Voters, I'm hoping to collaborate with a lot of the other community organizations that I've worked with in the past and really try to find an answer to increase our level of civic engagement and try to address some of those issues dealing with cultural sensitivity and figuring out why we haven't had the increase that we would like to have in terms of the population increase in Harris County. And so I'm really looking forward to utilizing this platform to just really get people involved and hopefully working together.
Thank you. Yep. And from the University of Houston, Professor David Branham, an expert on the local election landscape. Tell us about your special interest areas.
My special interest areas, I'm a political scientist, so my interest areas have focused mainly on state and local elections, some national stuff, and especially with the presidential elections and federal politics like they are right now, I've been paying a lot of attention to that. I've been at the University of Houston downtown since 2005, and I'm currently the chair of the Department of Social Sciences there. It's the largest, and in my humble opinion, the very best department at the University of Houston downtown. So I've had a lot of focus on state and local issues lately, and especially with Harvey. And so Harvey affected me personally, it affected a lot of my friends. So it's a very big issue for me.
If someone from Mars was to come visit us, what would you tell them? One thing, what would it be that you would tell them about the Houston political landscape? What makes us unique?
Well, the one thing that I think about Houston and the Houston area, when I think about it, I think about the incredible tolerance that all the citizens have for each other. And one of my professors told me this, when his name was James Gibson, and when I was in grad school, and he said, Houston's the most tolerant city there is in the world. And I just kind of stepped back and I started thinking about it. I said, why would you say that? And he says, well, and this was back a few years ago. He said you have people riding around with shotguns on their pickup truck, and you have all these little communities where you have the gay community, you have African American communities, you have conservative communities, and we all seem to be able to get along, get together, and do well, And when people say, well, what about San Francisco? Isn't that a tolerant community? He says, just try driving your pickup through town with your shotgun on the back. See what happens to you.
You see, we are unique.
So, we are a unique city, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
Yeah, and from the city of Houston, Stephen Costello. Steve, you're no stranger to civic life in Houston. That's a broad statement, so now you get to expand on that.
Well, thank you. As a former city council member, someone who ran for mayor against Mayor Turner, I'm honored that he asked me to come back and work for him. It was interesting when he and I were talking in 2016 post the tax day flood. He jokingly said, Steve, I'm going to call you the flood czar. And I said, Mayor, please don't call me the flood czar. But he did that publicly when he made the announcement, and that's what everybody calls me today, the flood czar. And so my role is just to focus on flooding and drainage for the city. But
your formal title is quite optimistic. It's an optimistic title, is it not? You're a resilience officer.
Correct. It's actually I'm actually called the Chief Resiliency Officer, and but I focus mainly on flooding and drainage. That I will probably give that title to somebody else as we move forward on some of the other resiliency efforts, and I will still focus on flooding and drainage in the future.
And by training, I believe you're an engineer, are you?
I'm a civil engineer, correct. I came here, I'm originally from Long Island, came to Texas to work for the Army as a civilian in Galveston in flooding and drainage, and I've been in that business ever since. And I was telling this story to a young man the other day that how I got in the business was in 1979, Tropical Storm Claudette occurred, and that's when they had 42 inches of rainfall in Alvin. And my job at the time was to go to a neighborhood and take high water marks, and I had never experienced a flood before. And here we were on Chocolate Bayou down in Brazoria County, 400 homes, everyone had all their belongings out on the front yard, everything was flooded. It was a very moving experience to see mothers out there crying as a result of the flood, and I said, this is what I wanted to do for a living, and I've been in the business ever since.
Yeah, so as you look back, you can remind us that Houston has been known to shoulder a few nasty weather episodes in the past. So it's not like Harvey was a new species of event. Maybe in terms of quantity, in terms of impact, it kind of got everybody's attention. But Houston is not new to this type of weather events. We weren't totally unprepared. What went right?
So I think the issue here with our climate and the changing climate is the fact that Harvey was such an unusually large storm. Historically, we've had rainfall events that are usually isolated and don't impact the entire community, where Harvey was totally different. Harvey impacted all community, from what I would call the socioeconomic scale, from affluent neighborhoods to challenging neighborhoods, which is really very unusual. Since I've been in the business, it's always been my frustration that people tend to forget about storms very quickly. But because Harvey was such an expansive storm, it's on everybody's mind, and it continues to be on everybody's mind.
Yeah.
And so our role is to try to figure out how do we mitigate for these types of storms.
Yeah, so let's stop right here and acknowledge, you just can't have a post-Harvey discussion without acknowledging this. The wonderful way the city instinctively responded in ways large and small, individual Houstonians responded to ease the burdens of those who were suffering. Everybody has a Harvey memory. David, tell us yours.
Well, I was very fortunate in my house. I live on Lake Houston, and the lake level is actually about 12 feet below my house, but it got up to within just a few inches of my house, and then all of a sudden one night the water turned around, and I was on a step in my backyard at 4 a.m. because I was checking the water.
And this was after the rains finished. This was when there was the floods were rising.
The big issue, quite frankly, was the Conroe Dam. They were releasing a lot of water out of the Conroe Dam that was going into the Kingwood area, into the Forest Cove area, and the Atascocita area, and all the way down to Friendswood. And so we were, I was getting up every hour and going down and looking at the water. And the water came up right up to my last step, and I checked it at 3 a.m. and it was there. And so I got up at 4 a.m. and went down there, and the water had dropped below that step, and there was a Dr. Pepper can sitting on my step in my backyard. And I took a picture of it and put it on Facebook. I said, this is the greatest
sign,
piece
yeah.
of trash I've ever seen in my life, because we actually see this water go down.
Were you bringing your things upstairs to the second
Everything was upstairs that we could get upstairs,
okay.
and we were sleeping upstairs. I would go downstairs to check on the water because, well, if we actually didn't have a way out of our house. We didn't have a good way because the roads were flooded. So we were spared, but I don't know anybody who doesn't have a friend or people that they care about who didn't get a whole lot of damage from the hurricane. And quite frankly, I said, like, the next day I was in a friend's house trying to clean up the damage that she faced, and then I went the next day I was in another friend's house trying to clean up the damage they faced. And I don't know a single person who didn't do that. If you didn't get flooded, you went to somebody's house and did it. And even during the flood, I mean, people were out on boats in my backyard. I had people come in boats saying, "Are you all right? You're making, do you need to go out?"
Yeah.
One friend of mine in Kingwood, she woke up at 4 a.m. and had water up to her chest. She's 74 years old, and she had water up to her chest. Called her daughter and said, "I'm going to die. I just want to let you know that I love you." Her sons heard it and put it on Facebook. And within 10 minutes, because it was on Facebook, somebody in the area knew about it, come and got a boat and got them out of there, saved their lives. So, I mean, the response of the community is absolutely incredible. And I will never forget it. When you talk about Harvey, that's usually what I think about, is every single person I knew did something for somebody else.
Yeah, and no big act of Congress required, no great planning, no great anything. It's just what we did. It's just who we are.
It's
I think
exactly
we should be
true.
very proud of ourselves. I think we should
I agree.
rejoice in that. Philip, tell us your story. You must know someone who was imperiled.
No, absolutely. I mean, for me personally, I had a 5-month-old daughter at that time. And so, leading up to the days, you were getting warnings, and friends were saying, "Why don't you just get out of town, get out of town?" And my wife, she was like, "No, we're going to stick it through." And then I had to make that decision. After making that decision, days started passing, and you're watching the news, and you're watching this rain just continue to fall. It was scary wondering if I was going to be able to go get supplies for my daughter, or if the power went out, how was I going to feed her? Because again, she's 5 months old. So that was scary for me. But once I figured my family was in a safe place, it was turning into friends and family. And all my friends didn't have the same luck that I had, and I had family members that were terrified by the situation. But even to David's point, because once I figured I was in a safe place, and then the building I was office out of in downtown, we were flooded, so we weren't able to work for a week. I immediately started doing everything I can to help other people. One of those, by way of the Urban League, we had the Operation Save Houston. And so we were in collaboration with the city of Houston and other organizations across town, where we got all the resources we could. We also started utilizing technology, like you were talking about Facebook. We used the website, we used Twitter, and so we're working directly with a lot of the city and county officials to make sure that our clients who are from some of those challenging neighborhoods, and then also just some of our stakeholders, whether it's board members or sponsors, they had the proper information so that they were able to navigate through this storm as a unit. So that was probably seeing people impacted was the clients, and then seeing there's people who are part of that network it was scary, but it was also felt good to watch people of all different backgrounds, and no matter where they're at, they just stopped and said, whatever I can, whether it's money, whether it's resources, or whether it's your time or sweat equity, they got involved, they helped out, and we did it together.
Yeah, and you no doubt were, Mr. Costello, you were no doubt in the city's command post.
Yes.
You're getting good information. Tell us your personal story, but also were you getting good information about what was going on in the city?
So it's pretty amazing, the Office of Emergency Management, and there are actually two. The city has one, and then TransStar is where the county was operating out of. And this is something they practice fairly regularly, these types of events. And when I got there Monday morning, and the team was already in place. The team had been in place 2 days already. And so we were there, they were there 24 hours a day. And we're talking about every possible department is represented downtown in that Emergency Operations Center, as well as all public safety, as well as all federal agencies that are impacted as well. And so it's a very collaborative effort. And so we would meet throughout the day pretty regularly, but then the mayor would come in first thing in the morning. We would go over what transpired the night before, and then we would meet again later in the evening, sometime around 6 or 7, go over what's gone on during the day. The biggest challenge we had right away was the shelters, is getting people to safe shelters. And then once we got them to the safe shelters after the storm had passed, then it was, okay, where do we have to get these people to? Where are the other services that they need? And the philanthropic community was, I've never seen anyone come to the table and help out as much as the philanthropic community has. All the nonprofits, churches, everybody was out helping it. So it was a pretty amazing thing when you look at it.
Yeah, in terms of how the city of Houston conducts itself, evaluates, makes plans for the future. Have you tweaked your rule book, your guidebook, your best practices guidebook based on that experience?
Well,
or did you say, good enough, this is it?
No, it's interesting because, as the mayor had said while we were there, we get evaluated 3 times, pre-event, during event, and post-event. And even though I'm working now diligently on the post-event, the emergency operations group has studied what we did during Harvey, and they're learning from that. And so some of the issues that they're dealing with now, they believe, is we could probably do a better job in our communication, interagency communications, particularly with the people that are out in the field. The public safety people that are in harm's way, saving people, need to be able to talk to other agencies that are doing exactly the same thing. So those are some of the challenges that we have. So if someone was to say to me, are we prepared for the next event? We're always prepared. Are we safer? I wouldn't say we're safer in terms of drainage improvements, but we are safer in terms of how we're going to react to it.
Are you okay with taking a minute to talk about the question of evacuation? An evacuation of Houston was not mandated or even advised. Was that the right decision?
Well, fortunately, I didn't have to make that decision. So as an engineer, I believe it's the right decision. I think we did the right thing. Mass excavation or evacuation could create a lot of problems. One of the problems we had during Harvey was that a lot of the highways were flooded, so people couldn't get out.
Yeah.
And we were having some problems getting equipment in. And so one of the issues that I'm working on as a resiliency officer is, okay, let's look at Harvey, let's look at what highways flooded, and figure out a way to get a resiliency so if we have an event like that in the future again, we can get people to come in and out of the city even during the event. So I think it was the right approach from the county judge and the mayor, and I fully supported that.
Yeah, and is it your best guess that infrastructure would not have supported an evacuation? I'm probably asking you to make a stronger statement than
So you're asking me to probably step out of my comfort zone.
But it's something that we wonder about. I mean, Philip was just talking, he has an infant. Do you leave? Do you go?
Well, so I've been here through a number of events during my career, and I saw what happened during Rita. And so I think there's a lot to be said about safety at home.
Sheltering in place.
Sheltering in place. I think the other issue that we need to do a better job of moving forward is an early warning system, which is something that's sort of in its infancy stage. The county has a flood warning system, but it's what we call real time. It's not an early warning system.
Early is how far in advance?
Several days in advance.
Several days, okay.
And so what the county is working on is a computer model to be able, working with NOAA, to be able to anticipate something like a Harvey event and be able to predict where flooding is going to occur and to give that warning to the residents a day or two in advance. So that's a novel thing that I'd like to see happen here.
Social media. You were surprised by how social media swept in, not only to keep people informed, but agencies, government agencies were tweeting and posting information on their Facebook page. It seemed to leave legacy media in the dust. Is that a correct assessment?
I don't really know. I mean, look at me. I'm an old guy, so I still like a book. I still like the newspaper. But, if you think about social media, the one thing that I
young guys, you're up next.
The one thing I would like to see is, we had some challenges in underpasses. We had some deaths. And so the county judge and a lot of us believe that there's got to be a way to prevent people from going into underpasses during rainfall events. Everyone has one of these. And what my ultimate goal is that as you're driving in the middle of the night in a rainstorm And if there is a flooded intersection or an underpass, that this phone tells you that you're about to approach it, to not go there. And so that is a novel thing to be able to accomplish. Not by downloading an app. I want it to be just like an Amber Alert, to where it automatically shows up on your phone. So at the end of the day, we will get there. But what we're doing now in these underpasses is we're looking at some structural improvements, sort of like a railroad crossing light, but not the arms. Everyone reacts to a blinking red light. They don't necessarily react to a blinking yellow light. And so if we can construct these blinking red lights well in advance of the underpass so that you can go off to the right or to the left away from it, then that's what we'll do. So we actually have a federal grant to construct about 23 of those. So we're real excited about doing that. But my ultimate goal is to have it on a phone.
A federal grant available for that, perhaps?
Well, there's a lot of FCC issues that you have to deal with the phone, but we've been talking to startup software companies to look at that option, and that's something that we'd like to pursue.
Okay, well, we have a bond issue on the ballot for August the 25th, 2018, the one-year anniversary of Hurricane Harvey making landfall in Houston, Texas. This is going to allow the county to raise something in the vicinity of $2.5 billion for the purpose of doing just the sort of things that you described. Can you give us the ballot language is not yet settled. The election has not yet been declared. We're going to talk a little bit later about the challenges of doing that, having an unconventional election on an unconventional date. But this will allow the county to raise money that you think is essential?
I do.
Tell us.
Absolutely. So when I'm out publicly speaking about the county and the city, I tell everybody the city is responsible from the rooftop to the bayou in terms of rainfall, and then the county is from the bayou to the bay. But if you're a resident who has flooded, you don't want to know the distinction between agencies. You want everybody working together. And so a lot of the projects that are in the county's bond issue are improvements to major bayous and smaller bayous that my urban infrastructure has to drain to. So I need that outfall capacity to supplement what I'm going to be doing internally to our system. And when you look at the total bond issue, now remember the county's world is twice the size of the city's world. And so when I look at all the county projects, there's probably about 25% of the local projects that are inside the city limits, but over 80% of the federal projects that they're funding are inside the city limits. So it's really beneficial for the city and the city residents to support this particular program.
One of the interesting things about this particular bond issue is that when people go to the polling place, they're not going to see a list of the actual projects. So they're going to have to do a lot of homework in advance. Can you give us a cheat sheet? A short list of what you're going to fund with this?
I would encourage everybody to get on the county's website, Harris County Flood Control District. And like I said, I'm a dinosaur, so if I can find it, anybody can. Right on the website, they have their bond issue icon that you can click on, and it'll describe the projects. They have 23 different community meetings. They call them watershed meetings. So it's community meetings in a specific watershed. They had one Tuesday in the Sins Bayou watershed. They have one tonight. And so they're scheduling them now throughout the community to encourage people to come, encourage people to look at the projects that they're thinking about doing in the watersheds. And if the community wants changes to those projects, they're welcoming those comments.
Mm-hmm. Okay, take me back one step further. Tell me what a watershed is.
Okay, well, watershed
Just like you don't know everything about using these little devices that we walk around.
Enough,
I don't know everything about watersheds. So here we go.
So when people say, well, I live in Garden Oaks, well, Garden Oaks drains to White Oak Bayou. So Garden Oaks is considered part of White Oak Bayou. Or
those, you mean the storm sewers that
right, all the storm sewers drain, streets drain
to
to those bayous. And for instance, I live on the west side. I live in Nottingham Village. Well, your drainage goes to Buffalo Bayou, so you're in the Buffalo Bayou watershed. So I'm sorry, I'm talking engineering needs.
No, this is exactly what we need to hear, because most people like me who live above ground don't know what happens to that water when it leaves their street. It goes someplace.
And it's very interesting because when you get on the county's website, you type in your address, it'll show you what watershed you're in.
That's a good piece of information. Some watersheds fared better than others during the late event known as Harvey? Or?
Yes. So one of the watersheds that really did well was Sims Bayou. And that's just the major stream that's down by Hobby Airport if you're going down I-45. And the reason why was it was a federal project that was recently completed, and it has what we call a level of service or a carrying capacity of the 100-year event. So when Harvey occurred, it really had minimal flooding down in that watershed.
So infrastructure really does make a difference in people's lives.
Absolutely.
Do you think that this could be replicated in other watersheds, or is the nature of your program very much dependent on the physical geology of a watershed?
Well, I think there are groups out now advocating for more investment in larger channels. We have limitations because there are developments that have been developed right up to the channel banks. And so people are looking at alternative types of improvements. But I think what everyone's advocating for is a higher level of service than we have today. And that could vary from watershed to watershed. The program, in terms of the bond issue, is really a leveraged program. Yes, it's a $2.5 billion bond issue on the county side, but it's supporting another $2 billion of federal dollars. So it's really a $4.5 billion program for drainage improvements here in the city and in the county. Several of those projects are actually ongoing today. They're federal projects that these monies will expedite completion of those projects. So we're all real excited about this particular effort, and we hope that the public comes out and votes for it.
Tell me about the concept of a floodplain. 100-year floodplain. What does that mean?
So the concept of a floodplain is if the watershed gets a 100-year event, water then runs off all of the areas.
What does a 100-year event mean? Does that mean
Well,
like clockwork you're getting?
In today's terms, it's around 13 inches of rain in 24-hour period. So it's sort of a very average type of rain. And so that water will run off, run to the bayou, and then it'll stack up.
Okay, so this does not mean because we had Hurricane Harvey last year that we're safe for another 99 years.
No, and that's the misnomer when we say the 100-year event. It's really a statistical 1% chance. So in statistics, it means you have a 1% chance every day to have a 100-year event occur.
Philip, in your work with nonprofits in the community, do people readily understand this?
In my work at the law firm, people don't readily understand this. This is all new to me, honestly. But it's good information, and I guess if you go to the website, you can probably get a better understanding of it.
How do you make this information accessible to the people that Philip deals with, people like me, who do not have an engineer that they can look to? Now, I'm going to call you up every time I have a question and say, explain this to me. It is...
Put your number down.
That's right. It is really hard for a person whose education and background may not have included advanced courses in engineering or the geosciences to make sense of this. So when I listen to you talk and I read newspaper articles about the 100-year floodplain, I'm really not sure what you're talking about.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And the issue of public awareness, so rather than describe the technical part, what we're doing is we're advising people that we're all at risk, no matter where you live. And so that's why we're telling them that you need to be aware of where you live, relative to flood risk. You need to make sure you have flood insurance.
Talk to me about flood insurance specifically. David, why are people so resistant to flood insurance? I read the statistics. It's staggering. Why doesn't everybody in Harris County have flood insurance?
Well, it's like Stephen said a while ago, people forget very soon. And so when they go through a few years without getting a flood and thinking, well, I've never come close to being flooded, what do I need flood insurance for? That's what the logic is behind it. And then what happens is you have an event like Harvey, where you realize that, I should have had this flood insurance all along. And the thing about flood insurance is it's federally subsidized, so you're actually paying a lot less than you should be paying. It's an incredible buy, and it's just not. It's not a good idea to go without it, because what you're paying for is worth so much more than you're actually paying for it.
And I know for some people it is a stretch to be able to budget money for flood insurance, even though it's not that expensive, especially when you're considering that you're protecting your house.
That's true, but if you think about the investment level of it, it's something you just have to do. In most cases, you're talking about something like $40 a month. So, you know, if you can invest that $40 a month, and it covers floods, you know, the floods aren't necessarily acts of weather. Floods can happen from all different sorts of reasons. So you need to go ahead and take care of this business and go ahead and pay that money, because in the long run, it's going to be very beneficial for you financially.
And nothing in that $2.5 billion bond issue is going to help you pay your flood insurance.
No.
No.
It's still an individual responsibility.
That $2.5 billion is going to go to basically infrastructure and things to help, you know, the county handle a flood event. And it's not going to help you rebuild your house if your house floods. So, I mean, infrastructure is very important. What Stephen's saying is incredibly important. And it's one of the most important things that government can do is build an infrastructure where it can support the community when a catastrophe occurs. And as he said, it's not going to completely support it, but it's going to make it a lot easier to deal with it. So, that being the case, that's what this bond is about. But as far as your house is concerned, you are responsible for your house. And the city is passing legislation making you more responsible for your house. So it's something you have to take care of.
What about buyouts for areas, individual homes even, that have suffered repeatedly over the last 4 years? I believe that a portion of this money, of this bond money, is going to be allocated toward buying out people, just saying that this is not going to work out real well. It's time for you to think about moving elsewhere.
Yeah.
And here's a check.
So there's money in the bond issue for buyout. The city is also getting money from HUD.
This is
for
a separate
buyout.
program. The HUD program is
Yeah.
separate, and that's already
Separate program.
activated, is it not?
Well,
It's
we have
already-
not received any of the funds. We just submitted a plan of action that we're waiting on state and federal approval.
So you
But-
haven't received any funds, and this is a year in progress.
Correct. So, but on the buyout program, here are some of the challenges with the buyout program. Whenever you're using federal dollars for buyout, it has to be a willing seller. Even if they flooded 10 times, if they don't want to sell, we can't force them to sell. That's the first thing. Second, if you do a buyout, then that lot has to be maintained as green space. You can never rebuild on it with federal dollars. So what happens is you have some challenges with the fabric of the community. If you go in and do a shotgun approach, it tends to come out to be blight to the community. So an ideal buyout is of critical mass, of several houses, several blocks, to where you then wipe it clean, you create green space, and then you can be a little bit more creative in either putting in detention or putting in parkland. So that's what you do. But here's another side to it. We have people that say, I don't want to be bought out, but can you help me raise my house? Help me make it higher. And so, like for instance, we have a lot of people in the Meyerland area that want to stay there. They've been raised there. They want to raise their kids there now. And so what we're doing now is we're doing several different type of programs now. We're doing buyout. We're also advocating for home elevations. And we're looking at what is called a tear down rebuild, to where you tear down an old house, you elevate the site, and then rebuild a new house on it.
I have seen, just driving through the communities, Meyerland and others, some houses that look like they're on stilts the way you see houses in Galveston. Is this a sound engineering solution?
It keeps water out of your house, yes.
Okay, even though you may be living in an area where Brays Bayou, for example, can get mighty nasty, your house is going to be okay.
You're still going to have challenges with mobility. You still might have your personal vehicle flooded. Some of those houses actually have elevated garages in them. So there are ways to
And the city is
accommodate for it.
encouraging.
Well,
if you have the personal resources.
We are actually changing our design criteria for homes in the floodplain.
Oh, how does that work?
So our current criteria, according to the flood insurance program, is that a house in the 100-year floodplain has to be built to 1 foot above the 100-year flood. We've actually decided that that's not good enough, that we're going to have you build to the 500-year flood level plus 2 feet. And so we're taking the extra step for several reasons. One is that what people don't realize is the flood maps are living maps. They change over time. And so we're anticipating another change to the living maps so that our current 500-year flood will be our new 100-year flood. And so we want to have extra freeboard so they're up above 2 extra feet. So you're going to see a lot of that happening in some of these areas where homes are going to be elevated. They don't look like a house on stilts. They're actually pretty aesthetically pleasing. But they
like
are
very grand
obvious.
houses,
Yes,
but
they
you
are obviously
know the
higher.
history.
Yes.
You do know the history. It's certainly one approach, and it's not available to everybody. Not everybody would have the resources, even with some help, even with some government help, to go ahead and do that, which calls to mind, look at it. Our communities with this $2.5 billion and other funds being available, are communities going to rise up against one another? Because even $2.5 billion is a finite number. Or
Well,
do you
it won't solve all of the problems.
So somebody is not going to have his problems solved this year.
I think that we will still have challenges throughout the community in the future, yes, even with this bond program.
Philip, are you taking special care to make sure that communities where the economic resources may not be lush are well addressed by this $2.5 billion?
Yeah, that's the hope, is that we can get them the information so that they can be a part of the conversation, part of the debate, and hopefully participate, whether it's going to one of the 23 meetings that they're having across the county and voicing their opinion, or just becoming more educated so that they can talk to whoever their elected official is about how this will affect their area. So yes, I am, and through the various channels, and I think that's even one of the challenges that you've given me through our advocacy initiatives through the League of Women Voters. So yes, but I think first it starts off with, like you asked me initially, was educating them so they understand how I guess their area is affected by the flood zone and the floodplain, and then understanding what those next steps are, and then so they can ask for the resources that they need.
Do you see voting yes on this particular bond issue as a path to actually bolstering communities that have been traditionally underrepresented?
I'm not certain.
Would you encourage someone to vote yes on this bond issue and then continue to advocate for their particular community after the money is appropriated?
Absolutely. I mean, I think when you're talking about democracy and how the system's supposed to be set up, voting is only one part of the piece of the puzzle. And so a lot of times I think some of the communities that we traditionally serve or advocate for, who are at a disadvantage or disenfranchised, they only understand that part of it. And so I think that's one of the challenges that we have, and I think that's a good challenge. And so yes, it is. I encourage them to vote for it. We understand there's a problem. But I think the next step is, how can you be a part of the solution? And I would ask everybody at the table, it's like, how do you make sure that everybody who is affected, even those who may have been traditionally left out of the rooms or left out of the conversation, how are they going to be a part of the solution? Or how do they at least feel like they're involved in the process, so that when you have to make that decision, like government has to do every day. I mean, even in my experience working on the state level, I know that the pie is only so big. And so that's just the way it is. But if everybody understands why you cut the pie up the way you did and why I was allocating, and for the various reasons, I think then they feel like, okay, I was involved in it. I can sleep and I can live with that the next day, and then I'll continue to fight and advocate for my community. But if you leave them out, then that's when you start having those issues with distrust, and that's why you have a certain level of civic engagement that we have. And then, people get on social media and people are complaining, but really they don't know if they're complaining about it because they're not a part of the process.
Yeah, just as a follow-up, if you look at the preliminary list of projects, the staff at Harris County Flood Control District did a good job of addressing what we would call equity. And that has been an ongoing debate in terms of equity. And if you look at all of the federal projects, just the definition of cost-benefit ratio is inequitable, because it favors the denser, high-valued areas rather than the low-valued, low-density areas. But if you look at some of the projects that they're proposing a number of projects on Halls Bayou. They're proposing a number of projects on Hunting Bayou. They're proposing a number of projects on Greens Bayou. All of the areas that one would associate with not having prior investments in them in the past. And then also in the southwest side of town, they're also proposing some additional projects on Sims Bayou. So it's exciting to see that they're saying, okay, we want to do a lot for a lot of people in the coverage. So, and I encourage everybody to go see what they're proposing at their community meetings.
How long do you think $2.5 billion, and the money that flows from that $2.5 billion with matching funds and everything. How long is that going to last us? Are you going to be coming back? Is the county going to be coming back asking for more money in 10 years? Because this infrastructure has to be maintained.
It's a 10 to 15-year program. And it's not a maintenance program. It's actually the actual capital project. So there's going to be demand in the future for additional funding for flood control. In the future, there will be.
The story will never end, will it?
The story never ends.
Final thoughts before we take a break, Mr. Costello.
No, I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. Thank you. And I do encourage everybody to get involved in the process. I mean, it's not complicated. Just spend some time to go out and find out what the county's doing and offer some suggestions. If you really think there are other projects that the county's not considering, ask them to consider those projects.
Philip, final thoughts before we take a break? You'll be staying with us, but final thoughts for this half.
This has been great. A lot of interesting information. And as you suggested, I mean, I want to go on these websites and make sure that I utilize the various platforms and make sure that I'm doing my job as a civic engagement leader with outreach and pushing this information out and encouraging people, okay, just take a look at it and before you vote so that they're informed voters. And then, like you said, continue to make sure they advocate so that they can hear from, you can hear from them and they can hear from you. And then that's how we have a shared democracy.
David Branham, your final thoughts for this segment?
Well, my final thoughts are that this event was so devastating and had such a wide range effect that when we started addressing issues like equity and so forth, this was an equity event. Everybody got damaged here. So it gives us an opportunity to come together as a community and take care of everyone in the community. So I think this bond issue and the details that Stephen was talking about, I think it gives us a chance to do that, and I think that's been a priority.
David Branham, Philip Yates, Stephen Costello, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to take a brief break, come back, and talk about the actual election process, because that is going to be something you don't see every day. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to Public Affairs, Public Access on Houston Media Source TV. I'm Linda Cohn with the League of Women Voters, and this evening we're talking about Harris County, Hurricane Harvey, and $2.5 billion. A little bit earlier we spoke about what we can do with that money, what needs to be done with that money. Now we're talking about the bond election that will raise that money. It's going to be on August the 25th. This is an unusual time to hold an election, and it's an unusually important election. Joining us this evening from Harris County Clerk's Office is Hector DeLeon, and from the League of Women Voters, Philip Yates, and from the University of Houston downtown, Professor David Branham. Hector, tell us about the challenges of conducting an election on short notice, on August 25th, when we don't usually have elections. And tell us about the challenges of making sure that there's some sort of voter turnout, because as you know, voter turnout is not Harris County's strongest point.
Well, actually, from the standpoint of the elections office and the Harris County Clerk, the Office of Standard Harris County Clerk conducting the election, it's all about administrating the election. We generally is to lay out the infrastructure. Obviously, you want voters to participate. There's 2.3 million registered voters in the county, but the important thing is to lay out the infrastructure to provide access to the voting process.
And this is going to be a full election. They're going to be paper ballots, mail-in ballots to those who are
The goal of the county clerk is to provide a full complement of early voting sites, which is 46, and to have a full complement of election day polls. So the challenge will be in trying to generate some energy among the folks that actually run the election day polling locations.
You have to raise an army of clerks and train them.
Because typically on August 25th, we're gearing up to engage or notify the folks that typically work the polls to get ready to hire their staffs for the November election. And in this instance, you have to go start and actually say, well, there's an election on August 25th and we need your team, for you to gather your team, all presiding judges, or in this instance, the presiding chairs for every precinct in the county, and the ones that are typically the presiding judges on election day, to gather their teams and in accordance with the law, get them trained to make sure that we have folks who actually make the democratic process work. Not just for the early voting period, which starts, theoretically, it would start on August 8th, and it would be minimum 10 days, if not the full 12 days that is typically.
With one Saturday and Sunday for weekend voters.
Exactly. So that's what we're looking at, that we're going to hold 2 major elections within a span of less than what, we're talking about 4 months, 120 days or 150 days or so.
Yeah.
So that is the big challenge for the office. And so, when people talk about the ballot, and in this instance, it's not how big the ballot is or what's on the ballot, it's that the Harris County Clerk's Office has to conduct the same amount of work to lay out the infrastructure to provide access to voters.
You're rolling out a full election.
There's one election on the ballot, or there's 100 contests on the ballot.
You bet. Professor Branham, you know that this election was not called for August 25th because a random date was pulled out of the hat. It was serendipitous that this is the 1-year anniversary of Harvey, but there was also the idea that we had to move forward with this election, could not wait until November because of a federal fund deadline. If you wanted those matching funds, you had to get rolling with this.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the money is there. And Judge Emmett has always made this a priority, to get as much federal funds into the county as he possibly can. And so, he just hates for money to go by us without us getting it. So this election, it's just basically a one flip of the button election, and it's going to be massive. Hector's talking about how much infrastructure it takes to do this. I mean, I see them do it every time. I'm amazed at how they do it and their ability to do it. I hear criticisms every once in a while because somebody has to drive a little ways to an early voting location or so forth. But I'm amazed at how many they have and how many they actually do. And at how quickly the results come in. So, I mean, the work that they do to do this, I mean, when you come talk about who's getting the job done in voting, I mean, the county clerk's office is getting the job done in voting. They always have. They have since he's been there, which has been, how long has that been, Hector?
Well, I've been there 15 years.
15 years.
Served 2 county clerks.
Yep, Beverly before.
And Mr. Stannard.
And I mean, while he's been there, I mean, he has done his job by providing a place for all voters to go. So I'm going to implore the other voters to do their job and get in their car and go to the polling place and go ahead and vote.
What's the typical level of voting participation for a November election, a general election?
It's for a November election. It's high, depending on whether it's a presidential election year or not.
For a this is a midterm election.
Yeah, so it'll be lower.
You expecting half?
In November, it'll be lower. It won't be half, I don't think. I'll be surprised. I hope it will be, but I don't think it will be half. But it's typically lower than in the presidential election year.
How many do you think are going to turn out for this bond election? Give me a percentage.
Are you talking about in November, the November
no,
general election?
For the November general election, let's say half. Let's be optimistic.
Okay, we'll say
half. But for this August bond issue, would you be astonished if you had half
Yes.
of the eligible voters?
I would be astonished if we had half the eligible voters. Not because the issue isn't very important. Like, to me, I'll be there at 7 a.m. to vote when the time comes, because this issue hit me in the face. I live in Atascocita.
And that's what I'm thinking.
So,
this Harvey issue hits, as you point out, hits so many people in the face. Hit them in the pocketbook.
Yeah, I mean,
how could you not vote in this?
Well, because in all honesty, a lot of people find other things to do on a Saturday morning. I mean, the election's on a Saturday. It's the only election on the ballot. It's hard to get people to turn out for that. I mean, my wife is a precinct chair. She tears her hair out trying to get people out. In the runoff election, for instance, we had less than 10% in the runoff election in the primary. So this is something that, that we have to appeal to the public, and you do, like, your organization does it constantly, appealing to the public to go get out and vote. But this is a situation where you have one thing on the ballot, and if people aren't passionate about it that day, then they probably won't go.
Well, here's where, full disclosure, I hear $2.5 billion, and nothing in my life experience equips me to deal with $2.5 billion. So, if you're going to say, it's a lot of money, and if you want to say I'm going to float a bond issue for $1,000 to buy coffee and donuts for a breakfast meeting where there are going to be 12 people, I know how to vote. I know how to vote for that. But for $2.5 billion, I don't know.
But that's going to drive turnout, especially the people who, if you're not for the bond, and there will be some people not for the bond because they think it's too much tax. I mean, you're talking about nearly $2,000 per family overall on that bond. You talk about $2.5 billion. But it's a very important infrastructure investment. So I'm going to vote for it personally. But there are some people out there who absolutely positively do not want to vote for a tax increase. So if that opposition occurs, you may see people go and vote against the bond.
And you may see people voting against that bond issue because they, with some justification, feel that the money will not be wisely spent. Yes, the need is urgent, but the money will not be wisely spent.
On some justification, you might say that. I mean, I don't think you would say that necessarily on justification of what you've seen inside the county. I think you might have seen it in other forms of government. And, a lot of people tend to mix up where the money's going,
of course,
right, and so forth. Even the letter from Governor Abbott approving the special election. I mean, you got a tone there of, well, there's a lot of money out there besides this that you can use, and so it's a
complex issue.
Yeah, it's a complex issue.
It's a complex issue.
But the thing is that we've seen with Harvey that the devastation that can occur when we don't invest in our infrastructure. And it's not just with floods. I mean, it's with roads. I mean, every time that you're in a traffic jam, you should think about how much money we are wasting sitting in our car running gas with a stop car. I mean, we need that infrastructure to be an efficient society. If you're in a traffic jam, just turn around and think, look at all the people that are stopped here and their boss, how much does their boss pay them? Maybe $20 an hour? Start adding up that $20 an hour when you're sitting in traffic. Government needs to create an infrastructure for efficiency. And that's what we need to think about. And this bond is part of that, creating an infrastructure for efficiency.
Philip, you're going to do a lot of work, I understand, getting people civically engaged, getting to the ballot box, not only in August, but in the November election and every other election after that. What do you say to people about a specific one-issue election that they may not be all that conversant with? How do you get them?
No, there's going to be some challenges. And I think what David was just alluding to was you have to remind them of what they went through. And you have to maybe revisit some of those stories, and so that we can all recall what we went through, whether or not it was you personally or as a family member or a friend, no matter the race and no matter the socioeconomic status, so that everybody does come together just maybe based on that. that emotional appeal to come to the ballot. Because I do think you're going to have challenges, like you said. I mean, in November elections, I think in 2016 it was 54% of the county voted, I believe. You're talking about a midterm election, you have less than that maybe, but then even in an August election where you're dealing with summer months and you're dealing with school about to start, there's a lot of challenges and factors that play into just the everyday voter, not because they're not concerned about the mitigation of, the flood risk, or they're not concerned about what happened during Harvey. They just have everyday factors that they have to deal with, whether it's work, whether it's transportation, whether it's childcare. I mean, there's things we all know about. And so I think unless we make it a priority, whether we're using all of our technology, whether it's social media and all our different media outlets and all our different advocacy groups like the League of Women Voters and Baker Ripley and the Houston Urban Leagues of such, we have to reach the people and educate them and make them aware of how important this issue is. And we only have
and make them aware of the voting process.
Yes.
Voting, you heard, all Henry says, voting is not intuitive. Nobody is born knowing how to vote. In fact, the process is sometimes counterintuitive. Hector, what do you do to make it easy for people on this particular issue, vote for it or against it, but how do you make it easy for people?
Well, first thing I want to say is that the actual turnout in 2016 was 61%, and if you minus the voters that are on the suspense list in Harris County, it was upwards to 70%. So all this talk about Harris County actually being a county that doesn't vote, it's just not.
It's not as dismal as the narrative has it.
How turnout is calculated in Texas as opposed to northeastern states that there are not voter rights states where they don't have a suspense list.
There is a huge difference when people talk about the percentage of those who vote. If your base percentage, if your percentage is based on number of people who might be voters versus number of
our job,
registered voters.
Whether one person votes or whether 2.3 million people vote, our job is to lay out the infrastructure regardless of who comes out to vote. Obviously, we want them to vote, but realistically, in the last election where there was a constitutional amendment election that occurred in odd, which you would think is an odd date, it was in September 13, 2013. And on that election, 13% of the voters voted. So if you were to say that would happen in this election, we're talking about 300,000 voters. In August 25th.
Deciding an issue very important to everyone.
Because I'm not sure you can expect 50%. I mean, the highest turnout you had in a midterm election was 2010. That was 42%. 42% of the folks voted, and in the last midterm it was 33%. So we know that people pay attention to various things. Obviously, this was something that a major occurrence here in Harris County. How the folks will react to that. To be honest with you, as somebody who has worked in actually getting people out to vote for 27 years, I think we're underestimating the voters' ability to actually understand what this is about. This is about flooding, period. Who didn't understand that? They saw the images all over the nation. So that is the issue, whether you're for or against it.
We're the nervous Nellies. You have confidence.
It's to address that issue.
Well, if you get into the ins and outs of the policy, though, we just got through with the term limit ordinance in the city of Houston. And a lot of people misunderstood that because it said limit. They thought they were going to limit it more. Actually, no, they're not. So unless you dig into
and the ballot language is something we haven't even approached yet because we're not at that stage yet.
So if you don't dig into the issue and really see where the money's going and then see, the efficiency of it after it's done, you really don't know that well. But I think, Hector's right. I think in this day of social media, there's no excuse for not knowing if you really want to know.
We have our work. We all have our work cut out for us. Right. Thank you to our guest, Hector De Leon from the Harris County Clerk's Office, Philip Yates from the League of Women Voters, and David Branham from the University of Houston downtown. We hope you've enjoyed our conversation this evening and that maybe you picked up a bit of information or insight along the way. As always, we invite you to visit our website, www.lwvhouston.org. I'm Linda Cohn with the League of Women Voters. Thanks for watching. Take good care, and we'll chat again soon.